Growing up, my life was anything but typical. My father, a strict but compassionate man, raised me by himself after my mother died when I was still a young child. For years, it was just the two of us against the world. However, when Amanda, my stepmother, arrived, she was everything I had not anticipated: beautiful, intelligent, and charismatic. Amanda turned heads wherever she went. I'll admit I wasn't thrilled when my father announced their engagement to me. It felt like she was invading a life that belonged to my mother and me. But as time went on, she worked hard to build a relationship with me, even though I kept her at arm's length. When Amanda moved in, she tried to blend into our lives seamlessly. She cooked meals that rivalled my grandmother's recipes, laughed at my dad's awful jokes, and even helped me with college applications. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something about her was off. Fast forward to years later by then. Then I was in my mid-20s working my first real job in the city. Dad and Amanda were still going strong. Or so it seemed. My visits home became less frequent, but Amanda always insisted on catching up whenever I did. She had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room. I figured that charm was just part of her personality, but looking back now, I see it differently. Then there was Joseph, my father's business partner. Joseph was about 10 years younger than Dad, with a magnetic personality that everyone gravitated toward. He was witty, polite, and had the kind of confidence that made people listen. When he spoke, he and Amanda became fast friends, often discussing books, art, and other topics that flew right over Dad's head. At first, I thought nothing of their camaraderie. Amanda was outgoing and warm to everyone, so why should Joseph be any different? But one evening changed everything. It was a crisp autumn weekend when I decided Ed to surprise Dad and Amanda with a visit. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Joseph's car parked out front. It wasn't unusual for him to be there. They worked on projects together regularly, but something felt different this time. I stepped inside to find the house unusually quiet. The smell of Amanda's signature apple pie filled the air, but the usual chatter was absent. I called out, "Hello, is anyone home?" When Amanda noticed me, she appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face beaming. Elizabeth, who seemed genuinely happy to see me, shouted, drying her hands on a dish towel. However, there was a little tightness in her voice that I couldn't quite make out. Location later, Joseph entered the room with a glass of red wine. "If it's not Elizabeth," he said with his signature smile, "how's life in the big city?" I smiled politely at him, but my focus was on Amanda. She didn't look the same physically, but there was an unspoken energy in the room that made my stomach turn. We spent the evening catching up, but the dynamic felt odd. It wasn't until Joseph went that things took an even odd turn. Elizabeth. And I couldn't help but notice how Amanda's eyes lingered on him, even though she believed no one was watching. Amanda softly said, As we cleaned up the dishes, I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the sink. Her tone was serious, almost nervous. "What is it?" I asked, barely raising my voice above a whisper. But before she could answer, Dad entered the kitchen, oblivious to the tension. He asked with a smile, just catching up. Amanda quickly responded, her expression changing to one of calm composure. But I knew whatever she was about to tell me wasn't something she wanted Dad to hear. That night, I lay in bed, reliving the events of the evening. Amanda's reluctance, everything felt off because of Joseph's persistent presence, and the anxiety that pervaded the atmosphere. My gut told me there was more to the narrative, even if I couldn't pinpoint it. The following morning, Amanda discovered me enjoying coffee on the back porch as the sun rose. She came outside with a composed yet resolute expression, saying, "We need to talk." I put my mug down and sat down next to her, my heart pounding. "What is it?" Amanda paused before continuing, saying, "You know how close your father and Joseph are. They've been business partners for years." However, lately, her voice trailed off, and she looked at me nervously. What I pressed felt my chest tighten, and she exhaled deeply as if summoning the courage to continue. "Joseph and I have been spending a lot of time together, and your father asked me to assist him with a project for the company. At first, everything was professional, but then she said something that really got to me. My voice was sharper than I meant to be, and Amanda turned away, her hands fidgeting in her lap, saying, "Nothing has happened." "I swear to you, Elizabeth, nothing inappropriate, but I feel icked. I love your father very much, but I can't help but notice the connection between Joseph and me." I stared at her in amazement. "Amanda." She acknowledged that I've been experiencing things I shouldn't, and her voice is hardly audible, which briefly frightens me. "What are you saying?" My mind raced as I attempted to comprehend what she was saying. Does Joseph share her feelings? I was unable to speak. When I eventually asked, Amanda paused, and that was all I needed to know. We've never discussed it, but based on the way he looks at me and how we appear to understand one another without exchanging words, I'm not sure what she said, her voice trembling. Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud. I experienced a range of feelings, including confusion, rage, and even an odd feeling of sympathy. "Amanda, you can't let this go any farther." I told her firmly that whatever you think or feel, you have to stop it because your father doesn't deserve it. I know she whispered that she was on the verge of tears, which is why I'm telling you that I need someone to hold me accountable, because I don't want to ruin what I have with your father. Amanda quickly wiped her eyes as the sound of footsteps approached from inside the house, but it didn't change the fact that she was teetering on the edge of a line that should never be crossed. "Good morning, ladies," Dad said cheerfully, unaware of the tension between us. Amanda replied in a steady voice, despite the turmoil I knew she was feeling. I forced a smile, but on the inside, I was reeling. It wasn't until a few weeks later that everything came to a head. One evening, I received a call from Amanda, whose voice was shaky, almost panicked Elizabeth. "I need to see you. Can you come over?" Amanda avoided Joseph completely, and Dad remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Amanda's confession had sent me into a whirlwind of emotions, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even more complicated. The rest of the weekend went smoothly, but the underlying tension was unavoidable. When I got to the house, Amanda was pacing the living room with her hands clutching a piece of paper. Her eyes were wide with fear as I walked in, and she asked in a worried tone, "Is everything okay? Just come." She handed me the paper without saying a word, and it was a letter written in Joseph's handwriting. As I read it, my heart sank in the letter as Joseph revealed his feelings for Amanda. He wrote about how much he admired her, how he couldn't stop thinking about her, and how torn he felt knowing it was wrong. My hands trembled as I looked up at Amanda. "Does my father know about this?" "No," she said quickly. After their last encounter, Joseph left it in his jacket. "I didn't know what to do, so I phoned you." I glanced at her, my thoughts racing, and realized that this wasn't just about Amanda's feelings. It was obvious that Joseph felt the same way. "We need to tell Dad." Despite the confusion in my thoughts, I spoke steadily, and Amanda responded forcefully. "Nothing has transpired, so I can't harm him in that way. We can deal with this without breaking his heart, Elizabeth." But I wasn't sure. Secrets had a way of coming to light, and I knew that if we didn't face it head on, Amanda's plea hung in the air, heavy with desperation. She paced back and forth, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I'll talk to Joseph," she said. "I'll tell him this has to stop. We've never crossed any boundaries. Elizabeth and I won't let it go any further. I just need your help." I folded the letter and put it on the coffee table, my mind racing with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, I wanted to spare my father pain, but on the other hand, I knew that keeping secrets like this rarely ended. Amanda has a way of revealing secrets, and when she does, it's always worse. Amanda stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes full of tears. "I know," she whispered, "but I just need time. Please, Elizabeth, give me that." Reluctantly, I nodded. "Okay, but you need to deal with this Amanda soon." She said she would, and for a while things seemed to settle down. Amanda then moved away from Joseph, and I watched the situation closely, hoping she would keep her word. Weeks stretched into months, and for a while it appeared as though things had returned to normal. Dad and Amanda were content. Although Joseph appeared to be concentrating on his work, and the tension that had before pervaded the house had subsided, I couldn't help but believe that the problem was still far from being handled, and that I was correct. I was at the house for dinner one evening when Joseph unexpectedly dropped by. I greeted him warmly as usual, but I couldn't help but notice how Amanda stiffened when he entered the room. Joseph's tone was casual, but his eyes flickered to Amanda for a brief moment. As the evening went on, the tension became palpable. Amanda avoided Joseph's gaze, and he appeared unusually quiet. After dinner, Dad suggested a game of cards, but Joseph declined, saying he had an early morning. Amanda appeared relieved, but I knew this wasn't the breaking point. Kamer Amanda Elizabeth's voice was hardly audible over her weeping. "I messed up," she said, "and I need your help." Her heart fell. When Joseph arrived earlier, she confessed everything to your father in a shaking voice. The words hit me like a freight train, Amanda. "What do you mean by everything?" She drew a trembling breath, and he informed your father how he felt about me. He acknowledged his feelings without claiming that we had done anything. "Your dad is upset." Elizabeth, I grabbed my keys and drove to the house, not knowing what to do. When I got there, the scene was tense. Dad was in his study, a look of betrayal and rage engraved on his face. I said warily, as Amanda sat on the couch with her hands gripped tightly in her lap and tears flowing down her cheeks. "Did you know about this?" Amanda asked in a harsh voice, as her father looked at me with pained eyes. I hesitated, not knowing how to react, Dad. "It's not as you believe," I started, but he interrupted me. "What am I supposed to think?" Joseph acknowledged having affections for my wife, Elizabeth. I looked at Amanda, who seemed completely defeated, but nothing happened between them, so I answered firmly. "Joseph's feelings are his own, but Amanda hasn't done anything wrong. She should have told me when Dad snapped, but instead she kept this from me. How am I supposed to trust her now?" Amanda spoke up, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said. "I was trying to protect you, to protect us. I never wanted this to happen." After a long period of silence, Dad finally got up, ran a hand through his hair and said, "I need some time to think." Amanda nodded, tears flowing down her cheeks. She said, "I'm so sorry," and then her father left the room. I turned to Amanda and softly asked, "What now?" The weeks that followed were stressful as she shook her head and murmured, "I don't know," in a voice that could be heard, "but I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." It wasn't an easy road, but over time the wounds began to heal. Amanda worked tirelessly to prove her commitment to my father, and slowly he began to forgive her. For my part, I learned a valuable lesson about love, loyalty, and the power of honesty. Amanda and Dad went to counseling in an attempt to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Joseph then quietly distanced himself and eventually left the company entirely. Even though I'll never forget what happened that year, I'm thankful that my family was able to move on together in the end. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's always better than the alternative.